We can keep our loved ones comfortable. We can keep their bodies clean. We can keep their bodies safe and let their spirits soar.
That strikes me, that's really the blessing of it, right? Because that's what's happening, is leaving this body behind, and you want the spirits to soar to, well, you know, into the unknown, into the mystery, and to free them of worrying about that.
Exactly.
And I think to free ourselves of living the rest of our lives fully, because if you're not worried about death, you can enter more fully, like, what am I here for?
Absolutely. You can embrace life.
I'm Janaia Donaldson, and I'm in Port Townsend, Washington, with two women who've been through a very special experience right here. I'm with Judy Alexander, who we've met before with community gardens and your own garden and all kinds of community building things in your neighborhood. And I'm with Kippi Waters, who's a caregiver with elders and hospice and people who are dying, right? And part of what brought you together, I think, Judy let me know that the activist that we first met here, Steve Ham, who's a solo man, had a terminal diagnosis, in the spring of
About a year ago.
2013, and wanted to die consciously with community around him, which I think is a really beautiful sense. We're in a culture that denies death, doesn't want to look at it, wants to avoid it, and all kinds of things, and you turn that around. So I'm going to start with you, Judy. Tell us a little bit about what happened around his wish for that.
Well, Steve's been a very active member of our activist community for as long as I've known him, which is about over 10 years now. And he had a lot of friends and a lot of associates and colleagues, and periodically over the years, partners for short periods of time, but he definitely lived alone most of the time. And he got a diagnosis of pulmonary fibrosis last spring, and started having to carry an oxygen tank wherever he went, and so everybody knew something was up. And at some point his functioning deteriorated enough that he was pretty much going to become homebound, and he knew it. So I'm not sure how it started, but we started putting together a team of caregivers. I've known Kippi from our community garden, and I knew that she had this position professionally as a home caregiver for people who were dying, and I wanted her to meet Steve because I was thinking originally that Steve might want to have a professional caregiver take him through to the end of his life. And so I took Kippi out there, and Steve and Kippi hit it off, I would say, pretty quickly. But somewhere in there, like sort of simultaneously, this other group of people all kind of indicated that they wanted to be part of his care team. So we started meeting, and Kippi became kind of our consultant in a way. She helped us figure out what we were going to do and how we needed to do it.
Was that something that Steve was open to, or was it an idea that he had of having caregivers, or he didn't know kind of how to proceed? What did he do with this?
I don't know that I remember how it happened, except that he had so many tight relationships with so many people, and all of us knew he was dying and needing to be homebound at some point. You know, it's just become kind of the way of our community to pull together like that.
Nice. What a nice community that way.
Yeah.
So Kippi, you know, you'd been there before with others. What did you help shape, and what kind of thing did you help people learn in this process?
You know, the most beautiful thing I think about this group is they came together for times of training. So I was really able to bring in a voice of experience, what to expect, you know, as the different stages of Steve's passing progressed. And also, there was some nervousness within the group that they wouldn't know how to care for him.
I've got to imagine. We don't know. I mean, where in our culture do we get experience at this?
Exactly. So we actually had several meetings where I trained, you know, I did some training on how to care for Steve, you know. And it was a beautiful thing to see how vulnerable his friends and acquaintances were, you know, in learning how to maybe transfer him out of bed and how to bathe him.
How did you help people get a sense of what they were going to expect or be doing for Steve?
You know, we actually met in different homes, and we practiced. You know, there's certain things that you need to know to care for someone who's dying, to keep them comfortable. Moving them in bed, positioning them in bed, helping them out of bed and onto a commode. And we met and we practiced. People took turns being Steve. Yeah, it was very profound and very sweet.
Yeah.
I can imagine that it's like, I can imagine my thoughts going, I'm the dying person. This may be me some years down the road, whatever.
One woman in the group came right out and said, I am highly uncomfortable with death. I don't think I want to do this, but I'm willing to because I think it would be good for me, and I feel the support. So the group rallied to include anyone that wanted that experience.
Wow, what generosity, both to be that vulnerable,
Yeah.
but also to acknowledge dying alone, I think all of us, there's fear here for all of us.
Yeah.
And to name that, or the fear of being incapable, or the fear of being unconscious, it's like, it's going to bring up everything that we are all terribly afraid of.
Yeah, and everybody,
Support.
everybody showed up.
Yeah. For what they could bring. We had a doctor in the group. We had Kippi in the group. We had a social worker in the group. We had a couple of ex-girlfriends in the group, which was another dynamic.
Oh, yeah.
We had people who had been through the AIDS crisis in California and had been through lots and lots of their friends dying. And somebody who was willing to do the online scheduling just took that job on. It was a nightmare to do because there was so many. It was right around Christmas time. Thanksgiving and Christmas was what the time that was encompassing when Steve was at his closest to death, and so everybody had needs in particular unavailable times, and so everyone pitched in however they could. They brought their gift or their talent to the circle. Probably 20 or 22
There's
of
a lot
us.
of people.
A lot of people.
And there was regular meetings and everybody showed up. It was very impressive.
Wow.
The commitment.
Wow. What was the process like? I'm asking it, as he was coming towards the end, I could imagine things that we all would call spiritual, or things you can't name particularly, are happening for him and for others.
Steve was extremely clear. I experienced him to be, in terms of his interactions with people, very interested in healing for himself and helping us heal. So within the group, there were people that had had some sort of long-standing discomforts or conflicts with each other, and he actively worked with us to get over it or get through it. I don't know if you knew this, Kippi, but there was, some things that Steve had been aware of through the activist community where glitches had happened between us, and he really talked to us about letting it go and moving on.
Yeah.
He got given a little cap that said Steve Hambone. His last name is Steve Hambone Rinpoche.
Spiritual teacher,
Yeah,
Rinpoche.
yeah.
Yeah.
What a beautiful way to go out.
Yeah.
Knowing
Yeah.
that you're giving back, continuing to give back, even as you're giving too.
What I want to add to that, though, Janaia, is that I've been through my parents' deaths and Steve's now, and I've learned that people do die the way they live. So while Steve was extremely clear and there was this kind of spiritually rarefied atmosphere a lot of the times when I was there, and I think other people visited, with that sense of, you're walking into the zone of kind of unconditional love when you get there for your shift. He was also very demanding of his care team and showed a side of his kind of compulsive character about where things belonged that was very stunning, and for some of us astounding, and we kind of agreed. The backstory was, we're going to make this okay for ourselves because this is Steve's deal.
Yes.
Nobody went up against that or took him down for his demands, and we just said we got to go there with him, so we all kind of rallied around.
Sounds to me like that aura of unconditional love was affecting all of you.
It
all the
prevailed.
relationships.
Yep.
It's sort of like it's too late to stay small.
Right.
In a way.
Right.
But he had some good teaching principles. He because he was weak and it was difficult for him to speak toward the end or even move. His principles were, when you come into this house, be mindful. if you move something, put it back. And, you know, the truth is, you know, that mindfulness is, you know, appropriate all
It's
the
a good
time.
thing. It's a good thing.
Yes.
So
Yes.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So he definitely became the teacher, you know, to all of us as we walked into the cabin. You know, so and you know, for a long time, and maybe even still today, I hear Steve's voice. You know, if you move something, put it back.
Is your apartment just a lot cleaner than
Are there other things, I'm thinking for our viewers who may not have ever been experiencing someone's dying process, have you got other insights that can help them consider being part of a support team? What might they expect, or what's good, other things, because you've learned a lot, you certainly have. What can you help? Give us a mini training.
I think the most important thing around the dying is to leave our own philosophies and the way we think it should look at the door, because it really is an individual process. And yeah, I don't know how better to say it.
That's so like, for example, someone may have a view that when you die you will go to heaven, and someone else may not have that view.
Exactly.
And you need to so I hear respect the dying person's
Right, not only their after experience, but, you know, well, this is your last chance to learn how to love me, Mom. You know, yes, exactly.
Okay.
So it has to be at that point about total acceptance. It really does. Yeah, accepting the person who they are, accepting your relationship, because honestly, during the time of death is not to work on life. You know,
and probably also the time not to deny that dying is happening.
the very
I
good
imagine
point.
that's
Yes. Well, that's conscious dying. You know, it's okay, I'm dying, let's talk about that, let's be real about it, let's be truthful about it.
Okay.
And bring it into conversation and make it a family, or in this case, a community experience and a community discussion.
Because that's going to be what's going to bring the walls down of you know, this taboo kind of area. Is to be conscious is to talk about it.
Is to talk
I
about
think
it.
that my experience is that so few people are comfortable talking about death, that when you present yourself as someone who you can have that conversation with as a caregiver, don't you find this with your clients, that a lot of your clients want to talk
Yes,
with you in a way
really.
that they feel like maybe they can't with their family members?
Yes, exactly.
Because there's that attachment of not wanting to let someone go. And I think that whereas it's true that you don't want to inflict your point of view on the dying person or your philosophy about death or something like that, being willing to have the conversation is a huge gift.
It's very valuable. And especially that first moment that it's brought up is such a relief.
Like,
To
this
the
is
dying
okay.
person.
We can talk
Yeah,
about
Yes.
this.
Yes.
And I imagine a lot of people are just eager and hungry to do that because they don't want to
Yes.
hurt their family. They don't want to.
Yeah.
And
We
That's-
experienced a lot of that just on the care team meetings, where people would talk about how it was an opportunity for them to enter into an experience with Steve that they wouldn't have otherwise had, knowing that they also are going to have friends and family members that they're going to have to say goodbye to. But they didn't. I don't know how many people had never experienced a death before, but I'm guessing maybe half of us. And I know one guy on the team, his brother was dying at the same time Steve was dying, and that was profound for him. His brother was in another part of the country. He was walking through Steve's death process, but feeling a lot of the experience of his brother's loss too. So there was just a lot of richness there that people miss out on with typical hospital-based deaths. You know, if someone gets put in a hospital bed in a hospital room, you don't get to do this.
Yeah.
I want to just bring up the word hospice because not everybody knows what that is. And so hospice, tell us what that is. It's part of the story for many people in their dying process.
Yeah, that's exactly, in the dying process is where hospice does come in. Hospice is an entity sometimes affiliated with hospitals, a lot of time private organizations, that when a person's ready to stop trying to find a cure or trying to get better and relaxing into, okay, I'm accepting that I'm dying. Hospice comes in with measures for comfort. really that's their focus, is keeping a person comfortable through their last breath.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so that includes medical kinds of things? Or
could
what
include-
examples do you...
It does include medical. It includes, well, there's volunteers that come in and help with bathing. Oftentimes musicians, massage.
Comfort care.
Comfort care is the key word here. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the friend that I shared in her dying process, they also tried to find the right level of pain relievers for her. And so the doctor came on a couple occasions to just find out what she expressed as the need.
Yeah.
She ran her dying was...
It's patient-centered for sure.
It
Yeah,
really is.
yeah.
I think when someone accepts their own death, there still could be a fear of dying in pain. You know, and hospice does come in and
Palliative.
Yeah.
Palliative care. Reducing the pain quotient.
Which is a huge gift. I mean, it can reduce that
It
fear.
really is, yeah.
And in a
yeah.
sense, your whole group became hospice. Sort of a hospice community, kind of?
Well, we did some of the things that hospice would do, and it was an interesting dance for Steve to figure out who to ask, whether he wanted his friend's care team to come in for certain reasons, or whether he wanted to see the doctor, who did make a couple of house visits before he died. So it really had to do with how much medicine was involved, you know, how much medical perspective and medical information was needed.
You know, I imagine most people in our culture haven't gotten to experience being in the dying process with another. Some people just die alone in the hospital. And yet I want to open that door, and with what you've done, have you help open that door for people to consider that. So, if you take yourself back to beginner's mind, the beginning of this, what kind of advice or wisdom or funny stories, whatever, would you want to offer to somebody who's just a beginner with this idea?
I would say don't be afraid. You know, there's a lot of unknown about death, but it's been my experience that when somebody knows they're dying and they're surrounded with people who are supporting them in it, there really isn't fear. What ends up, what the last spark of life is love. And fear's really not there, given the right environment and given the right circumstances.
And I would imagine that encouraging the dying person to not fight, you know, I think that you've talked about the letting go, and I'm sure that for some people as the dying diagnosis happens, they don't want to hear it, there's a resistance, I'm sure, everything.
Yes, but in the end there's not.
A lot of it, I think, has to do with encouraging the consciousness of letting go, encouraging the surrender and not fighting life, but letting it happen. Because we all die. It's an opportunity to witness one person's passage, and when you do that, you come away less scared or not scared of that passage.
Yes.
So I feel like, you know, witnessing my mom's death like 12 years ago, it's like I haven't been afraid of death since then. I was more nervous with Steve about knowing what to do, like knowing the difference between what hospice can do and what the care team could do and what Steve could do. Steve wanted to do a lot for himself. So delineating the rightness of the intervention or the appropriateness of a type of care was more what I worried about, but not the death.
Yeah. We can keep our loved ones comfortable. We can keep their bodies clean. We can keep their bodies safe and let their spirits soar.
That strikes me, that's really the blessing of it, right? Because that's what's happening, is leaving this body behind, and you want the spirits to soar to, well, you know, into the unknown, into the mystery, and to free them of worrying about that.
Exactly.
And I think to free ourselves of living the rest of our lives fully, because if you're not worried about death, you can enter more fully, like, what am I here for?
Absolutely. You can embrace life.
Yes.
And the times we're heading into, Janaia, I think this community support for death is going to be really key. Because, I mean, we all know that our medical system is pretty out of control with costs, and
Yeah.
the sterility of the experience of dying in a hospital. It's like, would people know that they have the choice to die at home? I bet a lot of people would want to make that choice. And if they felt like they could call upon their community or their family to team up with hospice and make that happen so that they could stay out of the hospital, I think a lot of people would want that. So, but it's a matter of cultivating that confidence of caregivers, that confidence of community support, and having somebody like Kippi to call on, just godsend.
I could imagine. I mean, we need. You're like one of our elders, or you're our trainers, or whatever, because you've been through it enough. I'd want that. I'd feel a little bit more out on a limb just trying to organize a group of people myself, because we don't know what we might run into. And I would imagine that folks like yourself, hopefully there will be more and more of you in different communities.
Right.
Do you also assist people in? I mean, in your group meetings, did you also talk about people's response after he died? What happened in that passage?
It was that was an interesting piece of this one, Janaia, because we were at it for a couple months, and Steve lived a half an hour's drive from town. So every one of us that had a shift had a 30-minute drive out there and a 30-minute drive back. And, by the time, plus he died 2 days before Christmas. So it was, the timing of it was all bollocksed up with the holiday issues. Our shifts were more frequent because a lot of people had to bail out of the team because of the holidays. They were gone or with family. And I think people were relieved. So it shocked me a little bit because I thought that we would want to have a community memorial service. And people on the care team said, no, we feel complete. We feel done. We had our chance to say goodbye to Steve.
Yes.
And people were ready to let go when he was ready to let go. So there was this, for me, kind of an unexpected difference from what you would normally go through in a community death like that, where memorial services have always been, to me, not to be missed kinds of experiences. And there wasn't a lot of energy for putting that together. So we didn't have one. We put something in the newspaper. So,
for those who weren't there.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
That was another piece of this with Steve that was interesting, was because he was without family, blood family members, and these were community members, and then he had this couple that sort of had adopted him and given him this cabin to live in for the last several years of his life. They were his family. It wasn't clear who puts the obit in the newspaper. Who calls the decision for a memorial service. And so we didn't really quite know how to do that. And I think if you deviate from a typical death, which is when someone might go to the hospital and die, and then you call in the undertaker or whatever, you kind of have to find your way with some of these roles. And Kippi, again, was really helpful in saying, okay, well, when this happens, you call this person, you don't call that person. We were instructed not to call 911 because once you call 911, they're funneled into the medical system and choices are taken away from them.
And Steve didn't want to be.
He didn't want to be sustained that way. So there's things like that.
Yeah, it's really true. I mean, after the whole after death is really another topic, but the body does not belong to the state. It does not belong to the morgue. It belongs to the friends and it belongs to the family. And we can be with it. We can love it, bathe it, honor it, thank it, dress it in silk, wrap it in flowers, before it has to be taken away. And that's a real important part of the process.
That's a chance for people the other people who may not have been to say goodbye. At least the memory of that person now at peace.
Yeah, and to honor, because we these were vessels. These bodies are vessels for our experience, and say goodbye, thank, bathe, decorate, perfume, whatever. So it's an important part of dying at home, and conscious dying is what happens after death as well.
There was so much of this experience with walking through Steve's death that I think allowed each one of us in our own ways to experience aspects of the dying process, whether it's the fear of death, or the letting go of a friend, or the ability to grieve openly with other people, or just seeing that death can be peaceful. It was rich, really rich, with all kinds of just opportunities that I don't think any of us really knew ahead of time. We didn't know we were going to get into the whole thing.
Yeah, it usually is a gift. There's so much unknown, but I always feel working with the dying that there's a door that's open. There's windows that are open, and to be in that atmosphere is a blessing.
I felt that when my friend Shania passed. It turned out that the two of us that were dearest to her were there in her last breaths, and I didn't know what quite to expect. She hadn't had water for 4 days, and so we knew that it was coming, and her breathing changed sound. And when it stopped, both George and I had this sense of a lightness sort of filling the room, a kind of peacefulness. I was in tears, felt my loss for this dear friend, and yet I had this sense that she was free and in a place of ease that hadn't been true for a long, long time. It's like, that is a blessing.
It's kind of hard to argue with that sort of peace, isn't it?
Yes. It's like, it's not in the mind at all. It's like the whole room. All of us were not in the same space.
And that experience, Janaia, is what then takes you into the confidence for the rest of your life to not fear death.
Yes.
That's true.
Yes.
So I'm going to thank you both for sharing your stories, your experiences, your hearts, your feelings.
Sure.
And I'm hoping that this will just open the door for you to consider being with others in the dying, and for them to be with you in a way that allows that love to be permeating sooner than you might have thought. You're watching Peak Moment. I'm with Judy Alexander and with Kippi Waters. Join us next time.